Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. You guys, Carol Garboden Murray is here. Why did I say that funny? Carol Garboden Murray is here because I'm so excited you're here. I can't even say your name. Hi,
Oh,
Carol.
you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be talking with you, Heather. I missed you.
It's been so long. I know, I miss you too. Um, uh, so we're going to talk about quality and kind of move from there. So this is part of a series in November where we're really focusing on the way we talk about quality in our field, and the way I'm sort of becoming uncomfortable with the way we use the word. So this we will have already done a couple episodes by the time this one comes out, but if this is the first one in November folks are listening to, that's our theme. Um, so to clarify, I feel like we really we drop this word quality into conversations and it becomes sort of a stopping point sometimes. Like we want to have childcare, we want to have early education, whatever, but only if it's quality. Um, and then, things happen, like every state gets to decide what quality is, and we're not really basing our conversations on any kind of like research that's been done about what kind of quality really impacts children. So with all that being said, welcome, Carol, to the conversation.
You, Heather. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but when you were saying that, I was thinking about, isn't it interesting that that's such a topic, right?
Yeah.
What is quality in our field? Because no one says what is a quality kindergarten, what is
Yeah.
a quality fourth grade or fifth grade. I mean,
Yeah.
we should always kind of be evaluating what's working for us and our
Sure.
families and our kids. But we're starting at in such a messy place
Yeah.
to say, like, there's no standards, there's so many ways of being cared for.
Yeah.
Do we want standards, do we not want standards, do we are and when we say quality, are we casting aspersion on someone else?
Yeah.
Like, what if I choose for my baby that they stay with their grandma for the
Hmm.
first 5 years of their life?
Yeah.
Is someone saying that that's not quality?
Yeah. It very much to me feels like gatekeeping.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
someone has decided, and whoever that decider is, also gets to be the definer, and that just doesn't sit well with me. Especially when we're going to get to a quote eventually, I promise, folks, but especially when I'm in conversations about quality and someone will just say, well, research says that quality early childhood experiences can lead to all these great returns on investment in the future. But if I say, what research? We just have this soundbite. No one's gone that deep. Or if I say, okay, in that research you're referring to, what were children really doing every day? What did that really look like? Because that's what's going to matter if we're going to say we have this research that says when they did this in one program, it led to all these great um, outcomes. Well, then let's dig really deep into what they were doing every day with children. We
It's like
can't
we're
just say quality and then everybody gets to define their own way of being quality and think the research is going to be the same. Anyway,
Yeah, sadly, we're already in this defensive stance as early childhood educators, trying
yeah.
to prove and trying to explain and trying to rationalize what we do. And it's almost like if I said, the baby who spent 5 years with their grandmother is great,
Hmm.
is fine, is in
Uh-huh.
good shape because they have a caring grandmother who let them play in the backyard, who let them make lunch with her, who
Uh-huh.
cared with dignity and had good conversations and good stories. Like, I could start describing what those first 5 years look like, but then we're afraid that we are irrelevant, maybe? Like, we have to prove the relevance of our teaching
Right.
instead of connecting to what it is that babysitter, that grandparent, that auntie, that child needed for the first 5 years of life to really be a thinking, thriving, happy person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, not everybody needs the same thing. They need what they need, and that's how the good outcomes come, right? Is
And
when
there's
we
no
get
and it's an illusion that we half of us don't have
yeah.
a grandma that will watch our kids.
Yeah.
That's where the
Yes.
That's where the early childhood comes in. We need to support our communities. We can be
Right.
an essential part of the lives of children and families. What is our role? What does
Yeah.
that look like, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think about when when I moved to Indiana. So I'm originally from Nebraska. When I moved to Indiana, I had a 7-month-old baby and a 3-year-old uh uh other baby. When I lived in Nebraska, I had grandma and grandpa upstairs. I lived in their basement apartment. I had aunts and uncles within a 5-minute drive. I had um adult nieces and nephews who were around. So I had the ultimate village, right, of helping me with this. And then I moved to Indiana where I had none of that. And not only did I have none of it, it was 800 miles away, Um, so that's when I started to think, wait, what if instead of me just pushing so hard to be seen as a real teacher, I start thinking of myself as part of an extended family for the children that I'm working with and their families? And what if I could take my children to a childcare place that felt like extended family? But that required me to shift out of my teacher ego. And I think we're kind of there again. I think when when we hear politicians or policymakers or local people, local stakeholders start to talk about this, we get excited because we're finally part of the conversation. But we don't push enough, I think. We don't say, okay, yeah, you're right. Quality is a good thing. What do you mean when you say the word? Because it might not be the same thing I mean when I say the word. And so that's kind of why I want to have these conversations to dig into just how many different ways the word can be used and negative and positive impacts of using it.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to do this quote thing. So this is from a book called Alternative Narratives in Early Childhood, an Introduction for Students and Practitioners. It's by Peter Moss, 2015. Does that sound right?
Yes.
It's part of Routledge Publishing's Contesting Early Childhood series, which is a really great series of books. Like I spent way too much money when I first found this collection. But here we go. This is on page 124. Where did it go? Learning cannot be reduced to something that can be predicted, to the reproduction of predefined standards by means of prophetic pedagogy. It is instead about being open to and welcoming the emergence of the not yet thought in oneself and others. As such, when it happens, it will be surprising, unpredicted, and a cause of wonder. And Carol's the one who found this quote for the conversation once we started planning this. And for me, because earlier in the book, Peter Moss, the author, is talking about this current dominant narrative about quality, that if we can just figure out exactly what to do every day, and then we can tell everybody else exactly how to do things every day, we'll get these great outcomes. And he says, if we can just figure out the right human technologies. And that was powerful for me. And so then when I looked at this quote and it ends with, things could be surprising, unpredicted, and the cause of wonder, that was like the opposite of thinking about it in terms of applying human technologies. And so I thought this is going to be a really great conversation with people. Because I think an episode that came out earlier, I talked about how I feel like conversations about quality have contributed to pushing out play and sidelining play. I think the same thing could be said about care.
Yes. Yes.
And that unexpected, the wonder, um, that brought me back to thinking about those moments that we share with children during care experiences.
Yes. I agree. And I think that we continually dance around the language that describes what we do.
Mhm.
And we have been told many times not to to talk about play. I think it's getting better, like in the standards I look at, and across the state, there's
Yeah.
more language about play.
Yeah.
And
It's
like
usually modified.
it
At
is,
least in my experience, it's
it
adult
is,
led or scaffolded or guided. But
it
yeah, I
is,
think
it
people are
is,
catching on that they have to at least use our language.
right? It's like it comes back to this basic respect for what it means to be a child.
Uh-huh.
And I think that anyone who spends their day with children knows that care and play are the pillars, right? That's what makes up the child's day.
Mhm.
And it's not just like, oh, let's talk about play and care throughout education, which, yes, we would love to do that, play and
Right.
care throughout education all the way up to college.
Yeah.
But we really want to think about the distinction of the early years. Like, it is a very play and care are very distinct, the role that they play in the development of the child's thinking, the child's worth, the child's self-concept. Play and care are the ways through which they develop. And
Mhm.
we wanna say, "Oh, call it relationship-based learning, call it, developmentally appropriate practice." We have all these labels that we keep piling on to
Mhm.
qualify, to say it's quality, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I just get really worried that we're kind of still hiding it and burying
Yeah.
it and trying to prove it. And
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah,
think, I mean, I think there's something to be said. I hope there's something to be said about this because it's kind of the point of the whole book that I'm that I'm writing. But I think there's something to be said to say we have to figure out what matters to our audience and use language that matters to them to make our point. But I think that's different from saying, well, we can't ever use the word care because
yeah,
someone will automatically be turned off. If I know the person I'm talking to is concerned about um, a child's future school performance, I can talk about how care contributes to that and how important it is to that end for me to be caring and relational and warm and loving with young children now. But I'm not going to say, oh yeah, so I just won't talk about that stuff, even though it's true. I won't talk about it because no one wants to hear that. That's different in my mind.
yeah. It's sort of like, so someone would say to me, in my country, in my town, in my community, when people say care, they think of daycare. They think of just keeping the kids safe and clean.
How dare they?
How dare they? And so I would say 2 things. I would say keeping the kids safe and clean and well fed is really important, and
Mhm.
it requires a lot of dignity, a lot of intelligence. It requires an art and a science.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is like, "No, I'm not talking about that, Carol. I'm talking about just, like, plopping the baby in the playpen and turning on the TV."
Mhm.
That's what people think of as care, and I
Mhm.
think we cannot then that's all the more reason we have to describe what care is,
Right.
because we know that care is inseparable. The child has to be cared for or they die. So
Mhm.
they have to
Mhm.
be fed, they have to be supervised, they have to be cleaned. Those things must happen or the child dies.
Yeah.
This is a different kind of way of thinking about care than if the child is 11 or 12 or 13 and 14. They're not gonna die. They know how to
Mhm.
go to the bathroom by themselves and all those things. So we have this distinct role in caring for children that is very different than older children. That is a gigantic part of our life that we live alongside children.
Mhm.
And children are learning all the time. So yes, that baby laying in the playpen with the TV on is learning. They are learning.
Mhm.
What are they learning right now? What are they learning about their needs?
Yeah.
What are they learning about their autonomy? What are they learning about their safety? They are learning. They might be learning that I'm a pain and
Mm.
people can't bother with me, and
Yeah.
when I cry, no one comes.
Doesn't do any good to ask for my needs to be
Doesn't do
met.
any
Yeah.
good, and I don't have a respected internal life. I have all this TV being, poured upon me,
Mhm.
entertainment kind of model. So they are learning,
Yeah.
but the distinction of the kind of care that children are engaged in, this, like, I guess you would call this, they call it, in this book, um, Peter Moss calls it, I think, the ethical encounter,
Yeah.
and I think that the danger of not naming it is great. It's a
Yeah.
great danger.
Yeah. And honestly, I think if we're in a program where to be considered quality, we have to almost look like older school, even with babies. We have to say that we're having circle time and we have to have put them in a high chair and do an activity with them because we feel like we have to, not because we think it would be, I don't want anyone who's ever put a baby in a high chair to paint in the tray or whatever to think that I'm criticizing that. That's not what I mean. But if we feel pressured to do those things to make us look like teachers and to meet some definition of quality, I think I think they're getting some of the same messages as the baby who's in the playpen all day with just a TV going about their respected internal life and learning some of the same messages. This isn't what my body's ready for. This isn't what I said I needed. Those repeated experiences, whether the child is consciously thinking it or not, those repeated experiences are building their ideas about themselves, their ideas about relationships, their uh their trust in the environment. And so there's a happy medium in there, I
Mhm.
think.
Yes.
But when we start to reject the idea of care in these ways, or we feel like we can't even say it, um I think we're putting children in harm's way, I'll say, as I cover my mouth a little bit. Um, uh,
Why is it, well,
I
you
don't
know,
know.
just have to think about what we value, and why is education the the pinnacle? Why is
Yeah.
that so much more respected than care? I mean, maybe that's why I say care is education, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Name it, care is education. Education is care. Education and care are inseparable.
Hmm.
But I also say, like, I'm not going to dis disguise it or
Hmm.
or hide it, because I want to show the labor of care as
Hmm.
valuable. And I think when we say care is education, people immediately might jump to, oh, the child is setting the table. And so they're doing one-to-one correspondence. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And they're pouring the water. So they're doing the crossing midline and using both bodies. Yes, that's
Yeah.
true. So you can see how care is education. But I want to go even deeper to say that it's enough. It's
A
an
child just deserves to be cared for and
yes.
about.
And
Yeah.
and that there's just a feeling in me that we have not just a feeling. I mean, it's been written about by many, many care theorists that
Uh-huh.
there isn't language in our educational systems and our psychological
Hmm.
systems to appreciate the virtues of care and
Yeah.
respect and
Do
trust.
you do you think that maybe part of the reason is just because you can measure education and it's harder to measure the value? The I'm
Yes.
value even in like economic terms. You can measure what's valuable about ABCs and one, two, threes and shapes and colors, but it's harder to measure what's valuable about just being in relationship with each other and
Yes.
loving each other.
Isn't that like why Peter Moss keeps speaking against containing children?
Yeah.
Speaking against the things that aren't pen downable,
Hmm.
like that we have to define our field as uniquely full of surprise and
Hmm.
freedom and wonder. We have to have faith that that's how thinking, caring citizens grow, is through those kind of environments that aren't trying to constantly measure. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about this a lot at my school because it's not like we're turning a blind's eye to development, right? So we'll have a group of I mean, in my school we have 70 some children, and there's probably 20% of them that get special services.
Uh-huh.
So we are looking at children critically. We are accepting them. We are loving them. We are seeing their strengths. We are hoping that we're creating an environment where they are thinking, and where we're
Hmm.
not so focused on teaching as we are on their freedom to explore and learn. But
Yeah.
we're also relying upon our expertise in child development to say, hey, this kid could use a little more support here or there. And
Uh-huh.
that's where speech therapy comes in. Or it's not like we're just saying every child grows free and wonderful like a flower, and we're swinging to
Right.
the romantic notion that nothing can be measured. Like, there are norms, there are measurements, there are standards that we can use to help us guide children.
Hmm.
If the 4-year-old still can't get the spoon to his mouth and is, super sloppy, and when they're eating, we might say, "Hey, what's going on here
Yeah.
with his organization, with his fine motor skills? What can we do to support him?"
Yeah.
So it's like it's not, I think creating these environments that value care and play are not rejecting measures, not rejecting standards, not rejecting
Mhm.
goals for children, but it's what did Peter say? It's a that you can't
Yeah, that's what I was just saying because I had
yeah,
to look it up, and
yeah,
because I love what he's saying, but I also just love the words he's using
me
here
too.
as
Me
a
too.
nerd. But yeah, he said uh we're reducing it to the reproduction of predefined standards by means of a prophetic pedagogy, which to me sounds like the only thing that we value is if we can get every child kind of on the same level, that idea that we can just standardize children, and that there's any way that we can just sit back and say, well, if we do this, this, and this, and this, everyone will be this standard child that we think is our measure of success. But what you're talking about is looking at, we have the standards as a guide, we have the milestones as a guide, we're looking at the individual children, and instead of just saying, in this class of 24 4-year-olds, um, uh, 5 of them are deficient in this way, and 6 of them are deficient in this way. So I'm going to make lesson plans around their deficiencies, and then I'm going to measure them again and see whether my human technologies have gotten them to the outcome we want, instead of what you're describing, where we just know these children really well. We know development really well. And so we're able to put that all together in an educational, but yes, also in a really caring way.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's this really relying on our knowledge of development
Mhm.
and strengthening the ways that I mean, I always think about the first time I heard Ron Lally speak,
Mhm.
because I was a special ed teacher and I had to put everything in IEP goals.
Mhm.
And I remember like the first time my director, Lene, wanted to look at my lesson plan, and she wanted to, because we were getting audited, and I just like had a fit. I was like this 29-year-old, teacher, like, I don't do, blah, blah, blah. I don't
Yeah.
do those kind of things. I let children play. And she looked at my lesson plan book. She's like, Carol, what is wrong with you? Your lesson plan book is just full of observations and your goals and your dreams for children. You know, it's like I was so afraid she was asking me to pen down
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to teach every day, and I had
Yeah.
a broader way of thinking about it, and I was really struggling with these IEP goals and how they fit into the standards.
Yeah.
I was at a funded school, a state-funded school for children with
Uh-huh.
special needs, and then I heard Ron Lally speak for the first time, and I really, it just melted me, because I just thought, he's talking about thinking and moving and growing and connections and communication in a way, when he described the work of the toddler,
Mhm.
that 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 was totally outside that realm of the math and science and literacy that I had learned
Mhm.
about. And I
Mhm.
thought, this is the key. It has to be about development. It has to be our own language. We can't be continually reaching outside ourselves to talk about these educational systems that don't fit the first years of life.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's really hard when, many times at least, those standards we have for early childhood are not built from the ground up. They're not saying, here's what we know about infants, so here's what our learning standards will be for infants. Here's what we know about 3-year-olds, so here's what we start at graduation. Here's what we think everybody needs to be able to do at graduation, and each year before, we just back it up and back it up and back it up. And when funding requires that our early childhood standards are aligned with school standards, like the system just sets it up in a weird way.
Yeah.
But I think, for me at least, part of the beauty of understanding development is seeing a different way of meeting the standards.
Mhm.
When we kind of understand how math really works in
Yeah.
birth to 5 brains
Yeah.
and bodies,
Yeah.
and how that, having that healthy foundation definitely does lead to being readier for math when you get to formal school or
And
whatever.
I mean, have you read the direct, like original source from what's her name? Cami?
Yeah.
I mean, she was like a
What's her
figure,
last name?
Constance
Yeah,
Cami.
Constance Cami.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
That
mean,
is her.
she's
Yeah,
no
yeah.
longer alive, but she was one of those figures that you would always see quoted in the 80s and
Hmm.
90s. And I finally
Yeah,
pulled up some books of hers, and I love the kinds of examples she gives
yeah,
for developing problem solving are actually care
yeah.
examples. She talks about the child spilling the milk and no one goes to clean it up for the child. And the teacher pauses and the teacher says, what shall we do? And the
Uh-huh.
teacher lets the kid make more of a mess because the towels that they have aren't absorbent. And what are they learning about spilling the milk and their own capacity and
Yeah.
problem solving and working through a solution? Like the kinds of, she talks about just involving the children when you're doing attendance,
Hmm.
and these ways of like, oops, who's missing? You want peanut butter, you want a cracker with butter or without butter? Those little things like
Yeah.
with and without, and developing the real life experiences with those quantity vocabulary and problem solving and having arguments with your friends in
Yeah.
the attic play corner and having to solve those kind of really complex issues because there's only one phone and three people want to use it or whatever, that
Yeah.
she describes play and care over and over again for developing this symbolic
Hmm.
ability to be
Yeah.
a problem solver, and says that people think math is clear cut. Math
Right.
is not pin downable either. Math is a creative process.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is symbols. And so I think you're right about this measurable aspect that, and I remember thinking this when I first learned about play. Children learn through play. So I was like, okay, so children learn through play. So okay, so they're pretending in the dramatic play corner, and then they learn like, oh, an apple is red and this spoon
Hmm.
is silver. So they're getting concepts through play. But then the next layer of me understanding child development was that symbolic thought, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is
Yeah.
the deeper and most powerful lesson from play is actually being a symbolic thinker.
Yeah.
And it's really comes back to what it means to be human.
Yeah.
It's to be a creative being, to be a
Yeah.
symbolic thinker. And so there's just this beauty at the beginning of life when we begin to see the child, the person becoming that can't be prescribed, that can't be pinned down. Uh,
Yeah.
but is so fascinating we can learn about as child development, right?
Yeah. 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 And I think maybe one of the other things that devalues the idea of care being enough is that we feel like, oh, anyone can do care.
Mhm.
And that's one of my favorite things that I remember vividly about discovering first the articles you wrote for Exchange, and then waiting for your book to come out and starting to have conversations with you, was how respectfully you talk about um, the skill and the expertise and the thinking and the intentionality that is required for care, to really care about young children. And I think this is definitely part of my evolution, and I think I see it a lot over the course of my career and with students. Sometimes we feel like, well, anyone could do just care, but to be a real preschool teacher, you have to have skill and knowledge, and we're not willing to let go of that for our own kind of teacher identity. But I've sort of gotten to the point. I said this in my presentation at IPA. I don't know that I've said it on the podcast yet, so who knows how this is going to land with people. But I think I'm at the point where I want to flip-flop that. I think anyone can do prescriptive preschool. I think if all you're thinking about doing is moving through a curriculum that someone else has given you and a schedule that everyone does, and you just move through the pieces of your day and you exclude the children that don't fit, whether it's a physical, actual expulsion from your program or just excluding from your effort, anyone can do that. You don't need special qualifications to do that. But when we think about what you're talking about, that understanding development, understanding how it ties into maybe future learning goals, understanding the individual, understanding how our interactions and our care and our respect for them is vital. That's where I see not anyone can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Oh, there's so many ideas when you were saying that, but it's interesting to
That's
think,
really on my soapbox there.
yeah, about how anyone can do it. And yet we don't learn it, right?
Hmm.
We don't usually have a course that describes what's happening for the child in the
Yeah.
care ritual, in
Yeah.
toileting, and that because these are the things, again, that are women's work, these are the things that we take for granted, these are the things that we think's no one else's business.
Hmm.
And I was talking about this also from a historical perspective, why it's so important for me to keep claiming care, because it seems like the denial of care is so markedly uh, turning our backs on the
Hmm.
wisdom of women.
Hmm.
And not that women are the only one that can do that. We
Right.
want
Or that every woman
all
does it
humans, right?
naturally. Yeah.
All humans, but we have been the ones who have been predominantly in the caregiving
Right.
role. And in that comes twofold. Some of us say, "Hey, I cook meals the same way my mom did, and you got to clean your plate if you want a second serving, and that's fine. Everyone's fine. This is the way I do it." And others us are saying, I want to really understand the science of feeding children.
Hmm.
And I want to study like how to know a child's food personality, how to
Hmm.
help them develop food autonomy, body autonomy, understand their satiation and their fullness. I want to understand all the quirky things that happen in development for children with special needs when sometimes they become super picky eaters.
Hmm.
Like how so there's just it's such a complex world, right?
Yeah.
Developing a relationship with food
Yeah.
and it affects the human for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It is a profound honor to
Yeah.
be caring at the beginning. And
Yeah.
so, like we say, anyone can do it, but everyone does it from maybe just their inherited kind of
Yeah.
knowledge. And sometimes
Yeah.
that is really wise and wonderful, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sometimes
I
it's
I
not,
mean
and
I
sometimes
use I use the Illuminating Care book in my introduction to early childhood class. And honestly, the chapter about feeding meal times is the one that generates the most discussion because of that, because of all of those things. And again, I think this is part of when we're not balanced with education and care, when education is way up here and care is way down on the floor, if we're allowed to acknowledge it at all. We're only thinking about 9 to 11 in the morning, and we're only thinking about the child from the neck up. What you're asking us to do here is to think about the whole day and every part of the day and the whole child and every part of the child. And that requires a deeper level of care, us caring about learning what we need to know to do that. If that last sentence didn't really work, but hopefully people know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I think just naming the specific art
Uh-huh.
and science of care,
Yeah.
it's like how much of our time do we spend in those rituals? So if you want to call it educational, I mean, if it has the same outcome that
Yeah.
people slow down and really consider the expertise required to care for children well, and if you call it education and it has the same
Uh-huh.
outcomes,
Yeah.
meaningful encounters with children, respectful encounters, then I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
My
Hmm.
experience has been that it doesn't result in those kind of encounters.
Right. Because we're looking at those care times as something to get through quickly to get to the more important stuff. I mean, everyone by now has probably heard my story of how proud I was about how fast I could change diapers when I was first a 2-year-old teacher. Um, and then discovering Magda Gerber's work and thinking, oh wait, I'm doing diapering way wrong. That's not the boast I thought it was to move them through so quickly. We're not all born knowing that kind of thing, so that's part of the importance of being curious and seeking
Yes.
um, information about every element of what you're doing with children every day.
And care can be uncaring.
Yes.
Education, I guess, can be uneducationable. If
Yeah.
you are learning that you're stupid, if you're learning that
Yes.
you're good at something because you're being shamed, then
Yeah.
so
Teachers don't like me and school doesn't work. Yeah, those are messages
that
kids are getting.
say that's poor quality,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
could show you what poor quality in care is, but kids are learning all the time,
Hmm.
all learning all the time. So how can we implement the best outcomes? You know, it I'm worried that if we keep eliminating these core components, the language around care and play,
Mhm.
if we keep watering it down and keep trying to fit it into these standards
Mhm.
without a clear image of what that looks like,
Yeah.
about raising the importance of this maintenance, our attitude towards this maintenance of care,
Mhm.
that it's not going to be done well. Children are learning all the time. So
Yeah.
the other thing, someone said something funny. I said, if children are learning all the time and they're learning in the womb, should we, I think I said this to you, should we
Yes.
call the womb the classroom?
Yeah. The
Like,
earliest classroom.
and someone said on my Facebook page, I can't remember her name, but it was so funny. She says, don't you get it? It's the class womb. She said, maybe if we call it the class
Class
womb,
womb.
we'll get better care for pregnant moms,
Oh
and
my
better
gosh.
prenatal care. Let's call it the class womb.
Oh man. Maybe. Right up those standards, those learning standards.
It is a lot about language, right? It is
Yeah,
so much about
absolutely.
language. But then what about the provisions to care, the provisions to teach well?
Yeah.
What does that look like in our field?
What
And
do you, so what do you mean by the provisions?
well, I just think that it's easy to talk about what
Yeah.
we for children, but when childcare, early childhood educators, these teachers who are with 0 to 5s, when they
Mhm.
don't get to take a lunch break, when they don't
Yeah.
have enough of a salary to rise out of poverty or
Mhm.
to take care of their own
Yeah.
families in the ways that they're taking care of other people's families.
Yeah.
And like, I think that might be, maybe that should be the number one indicator, I don't know, of
Of
quality.
quality. For
Like,
sure, I
are
think it needs to
the
be
people,
considered and it isn't, other than there's conversations about how we need to pay them more so they don't leave. But that's still about the economics of it. It's, I mean, in terms of if they leave, we don't have childcare and employers can't hire people because they don't have any place to take their children, whatever. That's the context I'm hearing a lot of this in lately. And um, so whatever gets people paid more is pretty okay with me. Almost whatever. I'll put an asterisk by that because who knows what people could come up with there. But I think if we're gonna throw around Maslow before Bloom as a slogan for children, we need to do it for the adults who are working with children also. Like we need to think about their Maslow, their hierarchy of
I think,
needs
yeah.
too.
And then there's this other side of it where you think about what's happening in my community. So in my community, UPK is being delivered in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And you can be 3 entering UPK. You can be 3 turning 4 in my county here. We just mostly do it for the 4-year-olds, but you can be 3 turning 4.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes it's in certain districts, in Kingston, Poughkeepsie, where I live, you can get hired as a public school teacher and be a UPK teacher. Okay. So
Okay.
those UPK teachers are getting all the teacher salary, benefits, pension,
Hmm.
which is fantastic, right?
Right.
But there isn't a lot of discussion about the distinction of early childhood. So when I go into those UPKs, it's so variable.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes, depending on the teacher, like
Right.
I wrote in my book, I was observing in a UPK in Kingston where a little boy pooped his pants, and I happened to be there watching. And she said, "I'm so glad you told me, honey.
Uh-huh.
Let's go to the bathroom and get you cleaned up." And I was
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh my God, I love her so much." And I
Yeah.
love so much that she is getting teacher pension and everything like all the 6th and 7th and 8th grade teachers.
Yeah.
But then there are other in that same building, teachers
Yep.
who have a very different attitude that are also getting the pension. So
Right.
it's not always getting the pension and the salary that's going to really help you understand the development
Sure.
of the child. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, I've been teaching 6th grade for 12 years. I'm really tired of these kids. I want to go teach the pre-K."
Right.
And they
Yeah.
don't have that knowledge. On the other hand, there are programs right here in my community that are contracting programs to come into the schools and to
Hmm.
for these UPKs, and the people are getting paid $18 an hour and they don't have pension. And again, from classroom to classroom, you can see beautiful care and really poor care.
Hmm.
But I think because we're not defining what the distinct role of the early childhood teacher is, it's
Hmm.
just it's so up for grabs.
Right.
And there's a school district about 40 miles from me where they say we just, there's legislation and stuff that says you cannot discriminate for basis of toileting and potty
Oh,
training
good.
for public programs like this. So some of the districts are saying things like, what are they saying? They're saying like, okay, we'll call you when your kid has an accident.
Oh,
This is how they're treating other.
right. We can't discriminate, but we're definitely going to just find a different way to
So we'll
discriminate.
so we'll take your child who's only 3 turning 4.
Uh-huh.
Even if they're 4 turning 5, kids have accidents, right?
Yeah.
So, and if they pee or poop in school, we're going to call you from work and have you come do all the
Hmm.
diaper changing or the pants
Yeah.
changing. We will not touch the child. We will
Oh
not.
my goodness.
So
Yeah.
again, like how if we are not naming care,
Hmm.
all these different ways that we interpret what is
Right.
quality, and that teacher who is got this beautiful lesson plan and she's going to be sure that all those kids know their ABCs in
Hmm.
whatever way she can by the end of that UPK year. And she's not really welcoming children who have
Hmm.
accidents or
Yeah.
is a normal part of child development
Yeah.
and in a central role of a early childhood
Yeah.
teacher, what damage is done.
Yeah. And that's another aspect of the conversation about quality. We can't, it's, there is no way to guarantee uniform quality. However we define quality, there's no way to guarantee that it's happening because it's so dependent on the individual people who are in the room every day. So I think about, like, in Indiana, we have the paths to quality rating scale for 4 different levels you can be on. Um, level 4 is the highest. I've worked in some level 4 centers. I've visited level 4 centers and homes in other areas. Um, wildly different, just like what you're describing, experiences, not only from center to center, but classroom to classroom, depending on who the people are, who the adults are in that space, what skills they have, how well they're being supported fits into that too, for sure, what their level of development themselves is. Even, having that degree in early childhood comes down to what your individual professors included in the classes, right? There's just no way that we can say we know what quality is, we guarantee it's happening every day if you meet this checklist. It's just way messier than people are willing to say. And then when we make it messier by saying things like, oh, well, don't talk about care, don't talk about this, we'll only use the word education. It's a messy thing, and it's a myth that we can really achieve it
It's sort of like when Biden,
uniformly.
a few years ago, when Biden said, we are going to fund early education, not
Not
daycare.
daycare. Yeah, that
I
still
want to
rings in my head.
I want to say we are going to fund early education, and
Yeah.
that doesn't look like school, right?
Hmm.
We are going to fund care, and it doesn't look like
Yeah.
school. We do
Yeah.
not want any of this to look like school.
Right.
Um,
It's so much of what Elliot Haspel said so well in his Crawling Behind book. Childcare should be seen as a public good, like school is, but
mhm.
it should not be school. And
Yeah.
he even, outlined and discussed it could be kith and kin care and still be a public good worth our investment. It could be a mom who can now, or dad who can now choose to stay at home because that's what they want to do, because we've invested in this way. And that could be part of this. It does make me really nervous that we're part of the political conversation as much as we are,
Yeah.
because of that. I don't want it to just become part of the school system,
Yeah. And
where
I think the
they
other
really will just be seen as deficient until they're old enough to fit the system.
there's this argument that we shouldn't talk about our place. We should not, I don't know, like we shouldn't talk about our place in the infrastructure that parents need us because they're
Mhm.
working, because that
Mhm.
devalues us to be just care.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to flip that upside down too.
Yeah.
That why not?
Mhm.
Why is that part of our work something to be ashamed of? That
Misogyny and patriarchy.
that parents need us
Yeah.
because women and men want to make choices
Yeah.
about how they're living their lives and where their children spend their days, that we are a central
Yeah.
cornerstone of the way the community grows and
Hmm.
evolves, and the way
Hmm.
the world turns. Like we are necessary in that
Yes.
workforce piece. And I don't think that devalues what we do in any way.
No.
It makes me proud
Hmm.
that I can support women and men in their
Right.
career goals. And my career goal is learning more and more about children and child development,
Right.
and being that expert in the community that can support these families.
Hmm.
I can learn from these children and these families about what's important to them, and how I can build partnerships that really respects what it means to be a family in America.
Hmm.
I mean, I think Elliot also talks about the freedom, right? Care
Yeah.
is so associated with freedom. The freedom to care,
Yeah.
the right to care, the right to be cared for, the right to care, the freedom to make these choices in our life. It's like we decided to subsidize food and farmers in this country because it is such a central part of our humanness. We must eat, but we never decided to subsidize care.
Uh-huh.
That's a privilege. That's a
Yeah.
separate way. So we all we can do now is just continue this rant about needing to be educators and linking ourselves to this educational system, which
Hmm.
I can see we are birthed to, the whole birth to college,
Uh-huh.
or whatever you want to call it. But I just
Cradle to college,
yeah,
cradle to career. I hear that a lot in our
that
community.
yeah, all
Yeah.
that stuff. But that cradle part really needs to be
Yeah.
defined as a distinct kind of work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think we give it lip service. I've been working with the NACI Code of Ethical Conduct a lot, and I know we've talked about it in the last few weeks. I do really find it to be a useful document, and I use it with students a lot. It starts out with a statement about how we understand that early childhood is a unique and distinct part of the life cycle that's worth, deserving its own respect. But when we're constantly looking at what comes next, it's hard to put that into practice, to put that into real practice. And we would have to acknowledge the importance of care if we
Yeah.
were truly interested in saying this is a distinct,
Yes. Yes.
valuable part of the life cycle on its own
Yes.
terms, not for what it brings us later, but for right now. That's the fight, I think.
Yeah.
It's figuring that out.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. I
Yeah.
love Peter Moss talks about what is the not yet thought.
Yeah.
And just that whole, like, I mean, it reminds me sort of some of Maria Montessori's writings about sort of the individualization of the child,
Uh,
like the potential, the emergence. I mean, I would love it if we could claim more of that kind of language at the beginning of life.
yeah.
And again, it's not that we do speak in binaries and we think in binaries.
Yeah.
It's not yet thought isn't just so free and flowery as not having this intellectual curiosity about thought, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it's like I just see the paradox there, and sometimes it does bother me that care is something anyone can do and play is just let the kids play. It's easy.
Right.
These things are not easy. These
Hmm.
things are really intellectually rigorous. Care
Yes.
care brings us to
For
ground.
child and adult, they're
Yes,
intellectually rigorous. Yeah.
yes, yes. Just the grappling we do about the child, about development, about how we care well for all
Hmm.
these different children in a group and all these children individually. It's complex
Hmm.
and multifaceted, just like play is.
Yeah.
And the simplification in our society of care and play, because it's not work.
Hmm.
Play is not work, so it's not as serious, and we can't really, say that. And care is something anyone can do,
Hmm.
something that will be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wish we could kind of claim these ways of labeling and languaging our field that
Hmm.
don't fit into um, the what's happening in the older grades. It has to come from a leadership, right? It has to come from the people who are leading these schools,
Mhm.
how do we link to the administration of the money? How do
Mhm.
we link to policy? So
Yeah.
you can see that direct link to leadership. So if the leaders are abandoning the language because they think they can't get
Mhm.
that stream of money unless they speak that language, then are they translating, once they get the money, are they translating it to a program that we think is quality,
Yeah.
that's really caring and really giving children freedom to think and to play and to be messy and to move and not to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it takes real courage, right? To be able to say, you may not value it, but it's critical that we keep this as part of the conversation and to continue to be at the table with people who say don't say care, and keep saying care. I think that does take it's financial risk, it's a professional risk sometimes, but it's not as big a risk as looking at early childhood programs where the caring element disappears completely.
And some states are really like acknowledging like the family care providers, like
Yes.
offering incentives for them to
Mhm.
get $2 an hour extra per
Yeah.
kid. They have the CDA and all this stuff. I mean, I don't know like enough details. I think Nebraska's doing some good things
Hmm.
for family childcare providers.
Yeah.
Like there are these amazing systems in place. And that's the other thing that drives me a little nuts about all the new initiatives. Like, why can't we bolster these systems?
Right.
Because,
Absolutely.
you know,
Because I don't know, it's critical that we have a diversity in the way we care about children and families, and this is part of that diversity, right? It can't just be childcare centers. It can't just be homes, family childcare homes either. It has to be this mixed delivery, but we also can't internally within our profession start saying, yeah, but that's just a home. I'm in the center. I'm a real teacher. You're just a babysitter or whatever that, or even elementary school people, saying, well, I don't do childcare. I'm teaching. We have to stop that internally. We have to really give that some thought about how that impacts our daily interactions, but also policy kinds of things. And
yeah.
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 Well, I'm gonna wrap it up by saying first, thanks, Carol, for being here. It's always so much fun to talk to you. I lose
Ew.
track of time completely. But also, if people don't have your illuminating care book, like if it's possible that anyone on earth doesn't have this book yet, they really need to. And at least at the time that I'm recording this, if you use the code ECE nerd to order it directly from Exchange, you can get 15% off of
That's great.
the book
Yeah.
Illuminating Care. But I love it so much, and conversations like this, I'm so grateful that we get to have together and that
I
people
am
get to
too.
hear you.
I'm honestly even grateful for people that are saying don't say care, because I thought maybe that because I'm so immersed in the care
Uh-huh.
movement and the respect for this.
You
What
kind of think the
what
work is done. You start to feel like
yeah,
the work is done.
yeah, like, and it's like, okay, it's still that. It's still that. We
Yeah.
really, you know, one thing that I found interesting was that disability movement had rejected the word care for many years. And I don't know if I've
Oh,
said that
uh-huh.
on this show, but they didn't want to be treated like infants. They didn't want people to think they
Oh,
were babies. I mean, I think it's interesting that we don't want anyone to treat us like kids because kids don't get respect in this country, but
right.
but that they wanted to say, hey, we are full humans. I don't know if care is the right word.
Okay.
Talk about the kind of support we need. So they talked a lot about assistance.
Oh, okay.
Now they're on board with the word care
Are
because
they?
once you start studying care, it's such a deep well,
Yeah.
and there really is this incredible body of knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, People really examining care as the seed of our strength and as the beginning of our intellect. It is
Yes.
education. So,
You know
so
what? I'm going to put in the show notes for this, like some of the care theorist book
yeah,
titles that you and I both I know love, and maybe some resources too for people who maybe are hearing about the idea of there being a care theory school of study or care ethics, to dig deeper into. I'm going to make sure I
yeah.
put that.
I'm going to try to do that on my website too. I've been wanting to do like a book collection on there.
Yeah, yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks
Thank you
again,
so much,
Carol. And
everyone.
thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.